Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Infinite versus Finite Cybersecurity, how to avoid the perils of cybersecurity failure. This is a live broadcast, not recorded, so given that we're in lockdown, I've had to banish my wife and family from the room to avoid any background noise and any of the pitfalls of children running in screaming. So if you do hear any of the background noise, that's demonstrates that this is live. Just by way of introduction, my name's Philip Mason. I'm software director at Information Risk Management, which is part of the Altran and Capgemini group. I work within the World Class Centre for Cybersecurity. I've worked within cybersecurity for 20 years now, and I currently manage a wider GRC platform called Synergy, which is going to be thread throughout today's webinar. So I last ran this presentation back at the beginning of March, partly due to the fact that we were exhibiting at a exhibition called Cloud Expo down at the Excel Centre in London. With that facility being turned into one of the Nightingale hospitals across the UK, I decided to run this webinar again to raise money for the NHS, which is something that's personal to myself, but also something I know the country as a whole is supporting. So thank you for your participation today. For every attendee that registered for the event, I have contributed some money of my own money to the NHS. So I've nice to see you all here today, and thanks for helping me to put my hand in my pocket. So that's my just cause for why we're running today's webinar, but also I hope to give you some valuable experience and knowledge that you can take back into your own businesses. So what's the purpose of the webinar? Well, in an industry that has no rules, no beginning or end, I wanted to explore how you can build your infinite game theory. To explain this, I'll meander across a number of areas using my experience in security architecture, vulnerability management, asset management, security management, and I'll do my best to share with you what we are seeing, what our customers are doing, and I'll finally leave you with some strategies that will help you avoid the perils of cybersecurity failure. Just in way of housekeeping, I think it's already been acknowledged that you're all on listen mode at present. You can raise questions towards the end of the webinar, so please flag those questions. The facilities there within the webinar, and we're also going to run a short poll through the webinar. We've done some questions to help make this interactive, and we'll share the results of that poll post the event, and I'll give some highlights of the results during the webinar itself. So the inspiration for this presentation was born from a book called The Infinite Game Theory by Simon Sinek. The book really focuses on the culture of business, teams, leaders and industries, and it looks at capitalism as a whole, which is something we're all questioning probably a little bit during lockdown at the moment. But at the heart of it, it distinguishes between two different types of games that determine culture and success. And those games are finite and infinite. In finite games like Street Fighter, for those of you an age, or chess for the strategists out there, the players are known, the rules are fixed, and there's an agreed upon objective that ends the game with a winner often being declared. Infinite games, on the other hand, can be played by known and unknown players. There's no exact rules, and the length of play is infinite. There's no winning in infinite games. The objective is to continue playing the game. So let's quickly look at some examples of businesses with an infinite versus finite mindset. Apple are and have been led by leaders with an infinite mindset who delivered cutting-edge products and consequently record-breaking profits. They've been united in a common cause, chose to collaborate, and with no clear end in sight. And Steve Jobs never compromised on his vision, and we probably all know that he wrestled the company back from those with a finite mindset on more than one occasion. It can be argued that Microsoft were a similar company 20 years ago. However, more recently, they've been seduced by a finite mindset. Some of you will remember Zune, I hope, those of you of an age anyway, which was launched by Microsoft to rival the iPod. And many would have said that it was the better of the two products at the time. But what Microsoft failed to realize was that the iPod was part of an infinite strategy by Apple. And a year after the launch of Zune, Apple launched the iPhone, and in doing so redefined the market, and arguably the rest is history. So we're going to launch our first poll for the day. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to contribute to this. You don't have to, it's voluntary, so feel free to contribute, and then I'll share the results. Okay, great. So 67% of the attendees today felt that their business had a strategy that was aligned to an infinite vision, with 33% saying that their businesses still had a finite mindset. So that's something that I guess I was hoping to hear. And as we go through this, we'll look at how that plays out in relation to cybersecurity. So, how does the finite game have an application to you and I in the world of cybersecurity? Well, I think about this a lot and the infinite game and what it really means to the domain of cybersecurity. The game itself is fraught with peril. As many of you in the room will know, the adversary is formidable, failure is inevitable, and of course, the cycle of attack never ends. Now, I'm not here to pull our industry to pieces, but it's far from perfect. And in my experience, the culture of businesses and consequently our cyber strategies are often too finite, and we simply don't learn from our mistakes. Too many security departments view the cybersecurity game as having rules, a specified time limit more often than not, an element of winning or losing, and an ultimate destination. And in my experience, the reality is that none of these boundary conditions hold in our field. Now, I promise I'm not here to sell books. I'm not a book promoter, but this distinguished gentleman is Bruce Schneider, and he's one of the most quoted and quotable people in cyber. And he said, if you think technology is the solution to your problems, your security problems, then you don't understand the technology and you don't understand the problem. And this is a statement some of you might find hard that I agree with, but 100%, given that I develop software solutions for a living, I think it probably makes me sound a little bit crazy, but it's for a good reason. Too often, we see organizations viewing people as a cost, and they fling money at technology instead. Either they spend almost nothing or they spend a fortune. And I'm sure you'll all know, simply spending a fortune on cybersecurity technology doesn't solve the problem. And in my 20 years of working in the industry, I too often see organizations try to implement a cyber change program or a risk management program through technology alone, and more often than not, it fails. So we're going to move into the second question from our poll today, just to keep this interactive. Again, I'll give you a few seconds to read the question and provide your response. So results in, 16% of you said yes, you do think your company has that strategy in place. 22% said no, and I guess what I again was expecting to see is 62% felt that there's further room for improvement when it comes to introducing and integrating those technologies and making better use of them. And again, we'll visit that through the remainder of the presentation today. So the reality is that cybersecurity is an infinite game, but too often we take a finite approach to it by ignoring culture and people who are at the heart of the solution. And I see a large number of vendors on one side thinking that they have an infinite technology solution or consultancy service. And this example here was taken from my LinkedIn page, and it's from one of my connections. It's probably a connection I should probably remove, but he was pushing a consultancy service where he was able to provide all the inside knowledge in relation to a Dixon's car phone breach. Yet that individual's never worked with Dixon's car phone, doesn't provide any consultancy services around incident response or computer forensics. So I find it very hard to believe that the solution really was that valid. And I think what we find out is that these types of solutions generate problems and finite problems further down the line that either you or others actually end up inheriting. And on the flip side, again from my LinkedIn post, Dave Rimmer, who's CISO at was CISO at a large Japanese engineering company and is now part of the Capital One team up in Nottingham. I think he hits the nail on the head when he says it sometimes feels like incremental change is the only realistic goal for an underfunded security team, something I'm sure everyone on the webinar has some experience at some point of being part of. And when transformational change is needed in order to solve long-standing problems. And I think that again goes back to the fact that we need to look at this with an infinite mindset. But the problem is that this challenge is often compounded by the constant merry-go-round of CISOs and heads of information security. The amount of times I look at my LinkedIn page to see someone's moved on. And that constant moving and flux isn't for lack of anything to do with competency or greed. It's sheerly due to the fact that businesses haven't built the top-down and bottom-up culture that's required to deliver real change around cybersecurity. And I'll just give you an example. I mean, I work within the DevSecOps space. I work within security by design projects and engagements as part of my day-to-day job. And I see a lot of organizations build security as part of the start, middle, and end of a project, but give very little consideration to change management, change control, and how security is going to be part of the fabric of the business once that actual architecture or application has gone live. And this is where improvement needs to be made as part of the cultural change within our businesses. So normally when I'm talking about change management, I go through the reasons for why transformational change fails in cybersecurity, but with the time that we have available, I'm going to bring up onto the screen those reasons which you can look through as I'm completing this slide. But in short, in order to create an infinite cybersecurity culture, we need to first establish a team effort from the legal department, the C-suite, and the board. They all need to buy into the problem. And if we don't take it seriously, it will become an extinction level event. And I feel as we sit in lockdown, we are really learning the lessons of what an extinction level event actually can be to our organizations. If we're not prepared with the right architecture, the right infrastructure to support home working, all of these resiliency, business continuity, and disaster recovery action plans become much more focused, and we look through a different lens when it comes to saying, are we prepared? But we have the opportunity post-lockdown as organizations to protect our people, our technology, our businesses, and ultimately our data. And we must take this opportunity as teams, as security professionals, to implement change. So I'm going to launch the next of our polls. Again, just a few seconds for you to address those questions. This is a question that I think is asked often in our industry. It's not about determining whether people have got budget to spend money on endpoint solutions or consultancy services. It really is something I think reflects the state of the economy, the level of innovation and the level of investment that businesses are looking to make. I'm sure post-COVID-19 COVID-19, we'll find that lots of those budgets have been reduced. So results are in. 37% of you said yes, you do struggle with that investment. 23% said no, and 40% said sometimes, which I think reflects that cybersecurity is often a budget that is given and taken away based on the whim of the business, based on the value that they feel that they're getting from cybersecurity, and often what is in the media as to whether the business is actually meeting and in line with its peers when it comes to their approach to cybersecurity. So, like in all good presentations, we have to have some level of contradiction along the way. So while infinite cybersecurity is the goal, it's fair to say that finite cybersecurity is actually the starting point for many of you. And establishing a framework for defining the individual processes that you need to manage your cyber obligations is the 101. And I would expect most of the people on this webinar today to have got themselves into that position of 101. And this slide provides some of the examples from our engagements of where organizations have developed processes, developed overall activities around cybersecurity. So whether it be DevSecOps, whether it be looking at compliance and audits, looking at policy waivers and policy exception processes, whether it's looking at the cradle to grave approach to project security. These are all finite processes that you'll either have developed or be working on to enhance and to improve within your organization. And with each finite success, a little bit more of the iceberg is revealed, and the vision will become more visible to both you and to your stakeholders. And that will ultimately help to ensure that that budget isn't taken away, that sometimes sometimes actually is turned into a no, that you don't struggle to get the budget year on year. It's part of your OPEX and your annual CAPEX spend. So it takes courage to invest in an infinite mindset, and now that we've done the theory, let's provide some concrete examples. So for the last 3 years, both myself and my team have been working with Vodafone Germany, and I wanted to give you some examples of the engagement in relation to them. And it's fair to say, before we were engaged by Vodafone Germany, they'd already established a number of those finite processes, but recognized they needed a revolution if they were going to achieve their infinite vision for cybersecurity. And this slide highlights the processes, and we'll just go through those to give you some feel for the challenges and areas of improvement that they saw within their business. So first and foremost, when it came to the governance structure, they had a lack of visibility. While they had implemented an ISO 27001 ISMS and statement of applicability, they hadn't necessarily got the full business buy-in to that and ensured that all departments, all business processes were encompassed within that ISMS. So building a wider cyber framework that the whole business from the boardroom to the doorman had involvement in was a key aspect of where they felt improvement could be achieved. Assets not applied to compliances. So while they had CMDB with all of their technology assets, there was no connection or integration between the data assets and the technology assets, and those were sitting across multiple systems. The business as a whole had an enterprise and operational risk management framework, but had not matured their cyber risk management framework. So they felt that there was room for improvement around ISO 27005, establishing a threat-led risk assessment approach that would cover cradle to grave approach to security and all the way through to change control, so that they could see how changes to host address would impact the security of core applications and core infrastructure. And this is what we're seeing in relation to new 5G infrastructure as well. And ultimately, not having the insight, not having the single pane of glass, that single view, because ultimately the data is federated and and segregated in different systems, homegrown systems, SharePoint, Excel, so very manual in how it was being collected, and therefore difficult to be able to present to the business. And a lack of integration, back to that mindset that they'd bought the right technology endpoint solutions but weren't able to show the value of those solutions and show how those processes integrated with other cybersecurity processes to ensure the business wasn't duplicating effort. So for the past 3 years, we've been implementing a GRC product called Synergy, which we've developed in-house. That's been around since 2012, and we've implemented a number of modules into that customer environment. And the first of those modules is the asset and compliance modules. So this is allowing us to look at the regulatory compliance obligations that Vodafone had, both from their central CISO office, which have a compliance framework that they needed to align to, but they also have at a local level GDPR, PCI, ISO, SOX, other regulatory requirements, and being able to take the software and use it to self-assess, to be able to look at hardening of compliance, import outputs from tools such as Semantic CCS or from Tripwire. This is allowing the business to gain an automated view of the compliance of their controls, the effectiveness of those controls, and bring a level of industrialization around that. And that means that they can then report against multiple standards and show the progress that they're able to make. Risk management perspective, this is about implementing that ISO 27005 risk management methodology into the business, ensuring that all new assets, physical assets, were considered in relation to threats and vulnerabilities, but allowing the business then to take that data and make risk decisions from it. So ensuring that the workflow was integrated across multiple teams and departments that were responsible for both isolated and shared assets. Being able to recognize that not everyone is a risk expert and is going to make risk decisions, and therefore having the ability to ingest risks into a central portals that could be governed, and then allowing the stakeholders to then review those risks, to accept them, reject them, and agree the priority of mitigation in relation to them, so that the investment is spent on reducing the residual risk to a level that the business has appetite for, and ensuring therefore that the artifacts that underpin that risk decision making are available as well, so that it becomes less qualitative and more quantitative in terms of our assessment of the risk. From an IT security module perspective within the software, capturing vulnerability data from Qualys, from Nessus, and this is an initiative that we see most organizations still struggle with, that they've bought these tools, they run these tools on a periodic basis to look at hardening, to look at configuration, to look at patching, but aren't necessarily able to show what vulnerabilities impact individual assets, individual business processes, individual departments, individual applications, and in some cases not always remediating those vulnerabilities, or even if they do remediate them, that fix being a short-term fix that next time the scan is run, those test results proved that the vulnerability has re-emerged within the organization. So this is about giving the business visibility and having the evidence to track the progress that they've made. And back to that idea of cradle to grave, recognizing that our overall ecosystem, our business ecosystem, our endpoints constantly evolves. And while most of us stick our IT assets in a CMDB, we want to understand that as that CMDB changes, what new security we need to think about, what new threats and vulnerabilities we need to consider, and therefore what new controls, new policies, new hardening standards we need to implement into the business to ensure we're always as close to the threat actors and the kill chain as possible. So these are some of the examples of how we've been working with Vodafone Germany. That they're not exhaustive in any stretch. So we wanted to give you an example of the sort of path that you could take and the average path that Vodafone have taken. And in my experience, not enough organizations are on this journey. They're not thinking about how to take their manual and carbon-based processes and looking to automate them, looking to industrialize them so that they can get a more quantitative and real-time view of the risk and levels of compliance in their business. And research is suggesting from our internal research, and we do an annual research paper called Risky Business, and it highlighted that 40% of organizations are focused on cybersecurity, but not how they should be. They're all concerned about it, but as we all sit here at home, we're all concerned about coronavirus. And if we're going to avoid a breach, then we need a just cause. It's without a just cause, a finite mindedness starts to creep back in. In my 20 years of experience, I see these programs go around the circle, CISOs come in, new audit requirements come in, new regulation, new standards come in. And we feel like we reset the clock every 2-3 years. And our leaders will celebrate how fast they're going or how many miles they've traveled, but they'll fail to recognize that their journey lacks the directional purpose that it needs. So, so this is about essentially establishing that change program within your business. So I'm going to run the next poll question now. Again, give you a few seconds to answer that question. Okay, so yeah, in terms of the stage of maturity that you see your organizations at, 69% said some visibility of assets but still manual processes, 22% automated GRC process with fairly useful insights. So again, I guess great to see that level of progress that's been made, whether it's through homegrown systems or software solutions like the one that we've developed here. Low percentage, 6%, have manual processes coupled with lack of asset visibility, which is what I would hope after 20 years of this industry being, well, with the 20 years of effort this industry has put into implementing cybersecurity. And yeah, only 3% with a very mature GRC process with intelligent and useful insights. So yeah, room for improvement, but I think that's what we'd all expect to see. So it's a two-game player. I think that's the point, that's the message. Firstly, we need to establish a framework and the building blocks for your change program. We need to recognize that your organization will go through various stages of maturity. But ultimately, what my vision and what my just cause is to help organizations build this picture, build a picture of understanding how their processes overlay into an integrated risk management framework for cybersecurity, and that's about allowing vulnerabilities and incidents to be interoperable, so that we can understand how vulnerabilities lead to incidents, or how incidents were born out of vulnerabilities that we had, what infrastructure they relate to, what core applications within our business that infrastructure is underpinning, and how our outsourced ecosystem of third-party suppliers who we rely on, whether it be hosting providers or new applications, how they support the security initiative within our business. And most importantly for me, in order to bring this to the business and to ensure that that culture is understood from bottom up, top down, understanding how that data relates to incidents, how it relates to infrastructure and relates to applications. Because it's through that we can then understand how that data supports business processes, which is how funding and how we understand the business impact in relation to cybersecurity will come about. And ultimately, which departments we need to support to protect those business processes. And business continuity will be a huge aspect off the back of COVID-19 in my experience, and helping our business realign or reset their business objectives and achieve their business objectives in changing times is a key aspect of this. And this is what a good, what I would describe as a good GRC strategy should bring. It should bring this integrated approach to these processes and allow each of these processes to be enhanced and industrialized over time. So we're just going to go into our final couple of poll questions now. Okay, results coming in. So where could your company benefit from investment? Well, 51% people, 59% processes, 46 technology, and 43 aggregation of data. So a pretty even split across the board there. So that's interesting to see. And I guess it again reflects the fact that this requires a strategy that recognizes that people, process, technology and data are all key to being able to obtain that insight, to obtain that investment around cybersecurity, and ultimately defend our businesses. So really just looking to wrap up today's presentation, and wanted to sort of say thank you again for joining and supporting the presentation today. We've had roughly about 70 people join today, which is great to see, given that we're all at home, probably doing homeschooling as well as walking the dog or whatever else it is that you're spending your time on. But for all the benefits of acting with an infinite long-term view, it's not easy. Obtaining that infinite long-term view is a challenge. It takes real effort, and as humans we seek out immediate solutions to uncomfortable problems, and naturally we prioritize quick wins to advance our own ambition or our boss's ambition, and adopting an infinite mindset in a world consumed by finite goals can absolutely cost a leader their job. And the pressure we face today to maintain a finite mindset is overwhelming, and I think capitalism has force that. I feel that there's a degree of resetting. We're all going at the same pace at this moment in time. So I'm hoping some reflection will come off the back of all of this, where we can then start to think about that infinite mindset, and we can recognize that it's going to be complex, that we need to transition a lot of what I've talked about today to business as usual, so that it's part of the fabric of the organization. We need to recognize it's not just about the IT assets, it's about the data. It's about helping the business understand how that data supports the business objectives. And it's not about having a point solution to solve a point problem. Those point solutions are definitely required, but we need to make better use of that data, show better use of how that investment has been spent to the business, so that they can understand that it is part of the overall solution. And we've got to have the mechanisms, whether it's homegrown systems or solutions like Synergy, that allow us to measure success criteria, see how money is being spent on investing in mitigation plans, and that those mitigation plans are long lasting, so that we're not having to deal with the same problems month on month. And it's about changing behavior and working practices and challenging the norm within your businesses. The game doesn't end once we get there, it keeps going. There is no finish line. And as I sort of said, this is about recognizing that it never finishes. We've got to keep developing our business strategies around cybersecurity. Really that brings the presentation and the webinar to a close for today. We said that we would allow questions to be asked towards the end of the presentation. So I'm hoping that you now have an opportunity to reflect on some of the things that you've heard during the webinar, and you can start to post some questions. So I'll give it just a couple of seconds to allow those questions to be posted. I see a few coming through now, so I'll just give it another couple of minutes. And again, if there's any questions that you want to follow up offline, then please contact us at IRM or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be available to answer those privately. Okay, so we've got 3 questions that have come in. The first one is from Rob. What do you think the biggest blocker is when trying to achieve cybersecurity or GRC objectives? Yeah, good question, Rob. So I think for me, the biggest blocker is having the business recognize that cyber risk management is its own risk management discipline. I think give examples of other teams, finance, audit, all examples of teams that even into sales, you can recognize that these teams have their own tools, their own methodologies, their own processes, own CRM systems, and cyber is no different. We have to recognize that we need the right tools and tool sets to help us achieve our GRC objectives, and that is, as the poll suggested earlier, it's a combination of the right people with the right skills, it's a combination of the right technology, and it's a combination of being able to extract the right level of data. So the biggest objective is ensuring that you've got the senior stakeholders' acknowledgement of that and the benefit of what cybersecurity brings to their overall business. So that would be my response to that. The second question is from Sally. I feel like Jeremy Corbyn reading out Prime Minister's questions time when I read these questions. So should organisations follow one strategy or the other, infinite versus finite, or should it be a mix? Well, I think I've answered that one. I still think it's a good question, but yeah, it is a mix. We have to start with the quick wins. We can't recognise that we're going to have this infinite vision, and we must deliver it all in year one. So I think focus on what you're doing. Again, the poll suggested that some of you have already got those initial finite processes around understanding your assets, understanding the controls, and just think about how you can enhance those. And we work, as I say, with not just Vodafone, but lots of other customers who are looking at how to optimize those controls so that they can say, well, yes, we do logging, we do patch management, we do vulnerability management, we do pen testing, but we've automated the process around that, and we've enhanced it in a way that we can get real-time views around our controls against hardening standards, against policies, for example. So think about enhancing existing finite processes before you start to introduce new ones. And then the final question that I've got here is in relation to Vodafone. So what made Vodafone choose to source a GRC tool to support them? The simple answer is in the name of their project, and that is insight. The business wanted insight into compliance, into risk management, and through a series of federated and disjointed SharePoint files and Excel spreadsheets, they recognized they just couldn't extract that data into a meaningful language that would allow the business to understand how their investment was helping to protect the organization. And I think ultimately, when you're part of a critical national infrastructure, you're providing contracts and delivering services to big conglomerates, then you've got to be able to demonstrate how you're meeting your regulatory obligations, but also how you're defending the business. And I think that pressure, that downward pressure, drove Vodafone to achieving and recognizing that they wanted to get to that point where they could industrialize it. And I think as we work from home, moving away from some of the carbon mechanisms for assessing compliance and risk, which are very people-based, very much fill in this questionnaire, send it back, and we'll make an assessment. it's about combining that effort with what can other systems, what can other data tell us, so that we can start to be more quantitative in our analysis of risk management and start to predict when a risk is going to come to fruition, when we're going to be attacked. We can start to use the data and use machine learning and AI to really be one step ahead where possible from the attack vectors out there. So that sort of brings today's presentation to a conclusion. I'm sure other questions will come in as I'm wrapping up, but I'll answer those questions in due course in response to any inquiries that are made around the webinar today. We're happy to share the content from today as well, so if you want a copy of the presentation, please get in touch. But just really finally to say thank you for all contributing today and joining me. You've raised some good money for the NHS, and really stay safe, stay at home, follow the guidance, and hopefully see you all on the other side of COVID-19. Thanks for your time. Cheers.